Good evening. This is Eyisegun. It's been a while since I last posted a video, and as I would say in my other videos, I don't believe in posting unless yeah, I feel impressed upon me to share something. So I don't post for the sake of posting. Um, Reason why I'm posting this particular video is because in 2014, I had a dream, and in the dream, um, I was in my dad's house, but it happened to be a church. It's a one-story building, and the church was upstairs with a side door entrance downstairs. And there were loads of people in the place. Um, Now, at the back of the building is what we would call a boys' quarter. It's just like a small flat, so to speak, which was only one story. On top of the what would be normally be the roof of that uh, rare building is a balcony, so that if you were to come out of the top of the main house, the first floor of the main house, there was a back door that led onto the balcony, which forms the roof of the so-called boys' quarter. Um, Now, I'm not sure how I got to know this, but I understood that church, the premises, to represent Nigeria, the country. And for some reason, and I don't know how I knew this either, but I got wind of the fact that there was about to be an explosion and that there was a device that was set to go off in the place. So I was warning people, trying to get people to leave the building. I said a bomb's going to go off and all of that sort of thing. Uh, People were looking at me like I was mad. A lot of people just didn't pay me no mind. Um, and after a while, I kind of had an idea of when it was going to go off. I don't know how. And when it came close to the time that it was going to go off, and I tried persuading people that I couldn't, uh, I proceeded to the rear of the building of the house. Now, at the back of my father's house, which is where there's a church upstairs, and lots of people, there are lots of people pouring into this place. There was another building. There's another house at the back of my house, so we were just a fence apart, and as I was approaching, as I left the building, a few people came after me with children and stuff like that, and there was a bit more urgency. So I started to help people. Some people, I remember two children, I threw them off the balcony into the house behind. I sort of was certain that the explosion would not affect any other building. I'm not sure how I knew that, but I did know. Um, and I was helping some people. I went downstairs from off the balcony on top of the boys' quarter, and I helped people to climb over the roof. And I was trying to get as many people across to the other side, and people were coming and people were climbing over. And suddenly, uh, there was a bang, and then I saw a mad rush. People were really, you know, jumping over, and we were throwing people over, helping people over, and all that sort of thing. And I think I must have run back up to the top of the stairs, to the balcony rather, and I ran and I got people, and I must have been throwing them across. And just as the last explosion was going to happen, and I seems to know, because just like in the movies where you see there's a large explosion and the main actor just dives and all of that sort of thing, I did that sort of thing, and I jumped into the house behind, with as many people as I could. Um, Obviously, a lot of many people didn't make it, or I don't know if any, how many people died, but I just took out as many people as I could. Um, and then the next thing in this dream, I was at the side of the house, and there were lots of people downstairs. This was my dad's house, which for some reason was still standing and looked pretty normal, you know. And I saw lots of people trying to get in. So I thought, what's the hurry? What's the rush? Why are people trying to get into this building? And I don't know if you remember Fred Flintstones. If he was caught up in an explosion, half his clothes would be blown off his body and the rest would be tatters. So there were people trying to get in, and I also was trying to get in to the building, but I was covered with soot. I had all this black stuff on it, on me. My clothes were half blown off by the explosion, and I actually was the only person that looked like that. And people were just going about their business as normal, trying to get in the building. And eventually, we went upstairs, and people were just doing a lot of praising and thanksgiving. Um, but the thing that struck me is that it didn't seem to be that it seemed as though they had forgotten what had just transpired and the enormity of it. So people were just doing carry on as normal. And I woke up. Um, it shook me because the warnings in the dream were real, and I didn't discard it, but I didn't understand it fully. I spoke to a friend of mine who gave me an idea of what they felt was going on, and then I just forgot all about it. Now this is in 2014. Now we're in what? We're in May 2016, and last week, probably the first, which is either last week of April, actually the first week of May. Within the first week of May, I had another dream, and in this dream, I was in a very large auditorium, and there were tables and chairs there, like school, you know, like desks, and they were arranged in blocks. So one block would have like 100 tables and chairs, and people were seated, and then there'd be a bit of a gap. Then the next block of 100, and it carried on throughout the building. I remember that somebody who seemed like a lecturer, or some guy, and now this was in Nigeria. He left, or one or two lecturers, or what they seemed like lecturers or something. They left the building, you know, and so we were on our own, and people were just sitting down discussing. And I decided to go outside. On my way back in, there's a young man. When I say young, he's my age, a middle-aged man, and he was walking ahead of me, and he had a paper in his hand, and he was speaking to this other guy, and they were discussing, should they tell him, should they not tell him now. The him was or is a guy who I actually know in the flesh. He used to be a Facebook friend of mine, but I actually know him, and his name is Yemi Lori. Now, I'm not outing him or anything. He hasn't done anything wrong. I'm just mentioning he was the one person who was in the dream he was the only person in the dream that I actually knew or recognized. But apparently, he was like the not so much like the class captain, so to speak. We weren't in school, but it seemed like that. But he was in charge, and people were not being disorderly. People at their different tables and having discussions, and he just kicked back. He was just watching proceedings. He didn't carry himself. He didn't appear to exercise any kind of authority, and you wouldn't even have known that he was in charge of this whole auditorium. And it was very, very massive place. There were easily 1,000 people or more in there. Um, and so they weren't sure what to tell him or when to. And one guy just said, look, we have to tell him, that people have to know. And they called him aside, and they said, um, it went against us. Now, in that instant, um, I was taken to the Senate, and people were in the Senate, and there was this man standing who had a paper in his hand. He had glasses on. What had happened was that the head of the Senate, it was discovered. Now, this is not an allegation. There was hardcore evidence. He was found. It's like somebody who was caught with their hand in the cookie jar. It was found that he was sponsoring terrorism in Nigeria. Now, I don't know who the head of Senate is now, and I'm not accusing that person of sponsoring terrorism within Nigeria. That's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about a dream. In the dream, this person was the head of Senate. And apparently what had happened was that he was a northerner, and he was sponsoring terrorism. He was financing it, and he would actually go to their meetings and strategize with them where they need to go and kill people next, that sort of thing. So he was really directly, in a sense, directing affairs, who their targets would be, when they should go, and he was financing this whole thing. Now, that financing obviously included arms and all of that sort of stuff. And I don't know how the government found out, but it was no longer an allegation. There was evidence, So he was caught in this thing, and the decision was now whether he remains the Senate president or he's impeached, or and that sort of thing. So what it appears happened was they had a panel. So the government put together a panel, and this particular man, who I don't know, was responsible for delivering the verdict, and all of that, having done all the investigation and stuff. Now, nobody told me, but I could tell that if it went, if the man was removed, because I don't know, somehow he used his office also. For some reason, his office as the Senate president also gave him probably more clout, and for some reason gave some sort of advantage and enabled him even all the more to carry out these atrocities. So it seemed that there was a lot riding on this vote. In essence, if he was removed, then the whole country was safe, and in a sense, that was the end of the threat of terror. But if he wasn't removed, um, he then he it was like giving him a license, you know, to murder, to maim, and he would be emboldened in his objective. Um, and so that was the vote. And so when the guy who was to read the vote, or the head of the panel was to deliver a verdict, he stood up, and I remember uh, he delivered the vote in favor of the Senate president, which means that that man was going to retain his position and he was going to be free to carry on his, in quote, terrorist activities. Now, I remember he had a smile on his face, and immediately I understood the smile. This man uh, rendered a verdict that had been paid for. And when somebody's telling you something and they're lying, and they have this smile because even they know that they're lying, you know. Um, he had that kind of smile, that kind of something's gone down here smile. I've taken money. Now, the problem with that smile, or what bothered me about the smile, was that he wasn't somebody whom had to deliver this verdict under duress. In other words, I really didn't want to do it, but I just had to. I didn't have a choice. Uh, this man sold us down the river. He wanted to take the money and he wanted to deliver this verdict. So he was very willing, there was no pressure here, and you just knew that this was business. He had taken money, he got them paid, and he delivered the verdict that they paid for. Now, when I was seeing this side of the events that led up to these people going up to the Yemi Lori, who was the captain of the whole group or the class or whatever, I was still in the same building with everybody else, but I just happened to be I don't know how I was able to see what was going on in the Senate, so I knew what happened. Um, it seems to me that people had been waiting for a decision. Obviously, the nation was aware, and there was going to be a decision made. And so Yemi took the paper. They called him aside, and the chap delivering the news was quite frantic. He was very panicky, um, and I understood his panic because I knew that the moment that verdict was given, it was another way of saying to the Northerners and these Northern terrorists and these Islamic Muslim terrorist people, just go out and kill and kill and kill. And so Yemi stood up. Well, he was standing already, and he just said, "Look, I'm just going to go straight to the point. It went against us. For a split second, there was shock and silence. And then suddenly, pandemonium broke out. People ran out of the building, people ran out of the room, they ran out, and when we, there was shouting and screaming, like it was as though somebody had come to attack us, and everybody was like, there's a imagine that you're in a big room and then there's a shooting, the panic. Now I've been in a place where there's been a shooting, and I remember the panic so well. Not too long ago, a few years back, where I went somewhere and there was a shooting in the place where I went, and I can never forget the pandemonium that broke out on account of that shooting. Um, and so people just started to run helter skelter, and then when we got outside of this room where we had been, we were in like what was like a stadium. And I say like a stadium was the size of like, I don't know, 20 football pitches, you know, and there were hundreds of thousands of people. And I noticed I saw a lot of people of university age. I saw people in a lot of 25-year-olds, and so people started to run, and in their confusion, they will run to the gate, and then they'll run back. People ran to the street, then they ran back, and they didn't know what to do, and they were screaming, and as though somebody had come to kill them. And then I heard that, oh, so they're going to kill, and then people ran into the street and came back and said, oh, so are they going to kill us now? And so the whole panic was around this verdict had been given, and now we were going to be slaughtered, and people run up and down and just acting all crazy. And then I went out into the street, and I saw a man with a machete, and the man was running down the street. And I think people who had run out into the street saw him, and that even increased the panic. Now, what had happened was that this man had heard the verdict also, and he was running with this machete in his hand because he wasn't sure if he was going to be killed. It wasn't that he was one running to go and kill anybody, but he didn't know whether he was going to be killed. So for him, that was his protection, for as far as protection goes. So I came back into the building. Now, I use the word stadium ground to describe where we were, because just in the same way as you have a football stadium and the seats go all in a circular shape around the pitch, what they had. Now, this is the weird part. We were in Nigeria, but the houses that formed the circular structure around the pitch, and there were flats, were in England. Don't ask me how this works, but it was. And so what then happened was people started to run into these flats. Some were 2, 3, and they were all the same height, about 3, 4 stories high. And I remember that people started running up to the first, second, and third floor. And some of these flats were not occupied, so they would break the door in and go in and barricade themselves in there. Some of these flats, people lived there, and I remember that there were a few flats where people just wanted to break in, and I said, no, you can't break in because old white people live there, and if they just suddenly see black people breaking into their house or somebody in their house, that they will kill people. And so people were restrained. That was a quite funny thing, that in as much as I said that, people didn't push the issue. Anytime we got to a house and I say, no, you can't go in there because the people are old and they won't understand and they're going to have a heart attack and die, people stayed outside. But all over the place, people were knocking on people's doors, begging, asked to be saved, for shelter, that people were going to kill them and all this sort of stuff. And then we got to a particular flat. Now, at this time, all over outside of the gate and all of the country, there was pandemonium. People running around in the streets. They'll run to the end of the road, then run back, and people were just confused. They didn't know what to do, and they honestly thought that Muslims were just going to take to the street. These Islamists were going to take to the street and just kill them in large numbers with impunity. So I was in the flats with these people, and there were a lot of people, and so I remember we got to a particular flat, and I knocked on the door, and this lady, because her kitchen faces the landing, so she came to the window, and as soon as she saw some black people, she was like, oh no, she just went back and everything, and I was pleading with her, no. So as I was walking along, She had a young son. I think his name was Jake, about 7 years old. He came to a bedroom window, and that bedroom window also leans out to the landing where we were. So he came to the window, and I started to explain to him that, these people's lives are in danger and we're going to be killed, you know. And this little boy just went and opened the door, and he let people in. He let people in. So I stood outside. I was trying to get people into the houses as much as possible. And then again, like I said, it was like being in a stadium. And I looked onto what would be the pitch, so to speak, where there's loads of people. And people had run in and out, and people didn't know what to do. They weren't sure if they went out into the streets, they were safe. So a lot of people came back into the place, and they were screaming and shouting, "We're going to die," and this and that. And for some weird reason, people just went and laid on the floor face down. They laid on the floor face down. And there were two girls in particular, and they started to cry out. And it was a deep, deep, I don't know what it was about those particular cries, but it was a cry of the deepest anguish that a human being could ever muster. It was really, really soul piercing, you know, and they were rolling on the floor and crying, and they just, I think people just lay down and decided that, we're gonna die anyway. Let's just lie down here till it's all over, you know. And it was the scariest thing, but it was the saddest thing that I had ever seen of everything that happened. And this was another thing, because we were in this class where we where there were all kinds of people. There were northerners, there were southerners, there were Igbo people, Hausa people, Yoruba people, and then in the whole of the confusion, the Igbo, especially the northerners, they were running around in panic because they didn't weren't sure whether the Yoruba people or the Igbo people there were going to kill them. So we were afraid of the northerners. The northerners were afraid of us. Everybody was afraid of each other. People didn't know what to do. The northerners in the group, who had been with us, we were all together. There was no drama. Nothing was going on prior to this judgment. They were running around. They didn't know whether to run away. They didn't know where to hide. They didn't know what it meant for them, and they were not sure. They were thinking, these people going to kill us now? They thought that we were going to kill them, you know. And it was a really, really scary scene. But it was the cry of these two young girls that lay on the floor that just really, really arrested my attention. And of everything that happened in the dream, um, that was the bit. It was the cry. It was the depth of agony and despair. It was the anguish and the depth of that anguish. I'd never heard anything like that before. It was really, really soul wrenching. It was the kind of cry that pulled on your life. It not just on your heart, your entire being. Just it was awful. And I stood there and I began to weep. I couldn't, because I didn't even know what to do at that stage. And there were so many people. There were more people than there were houses, and it's not everybody who wanted to open their doors. And after a while, at that point of the cry, I looked at the people, and I had no idea what to do next. I didn't know what was going to happen next, and I just stood there, and then I woke up. Now, um, prior to this video, I've had this sense that Nigerians need to really pray for Nigeria, and I was actually going to do a video to that effect, over the last 6 weeks or so, 6 to 8 weeks, and I've kind of just like, it's been there at the back of my mind, but I haven't paid it no mind, until now. Now, I need to read something because. I'm not I'm not prophesying anything. I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but I'm very, 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 very worried about where we are going as a nation. And I worry about. I'm concerned about my dreams because when I do dream, my dreams happen. And when I say things, they do happen. Um, I, I, so I'm not trying to scare people. I'm not trying to, you know, uh, instill any fear. but I think something serious is happening. We haven't quite seen the fullness of it yet, or something will happen, and I feel that we need to pray so that those things do not happen. Now, I have spoken for 25 minutes, and I know people don't like long videos, so I'm going to have to do a part two of this dream that I had. So see you in the next video.